Hey, welcome everybody. This is Katy Wallace. We've got everybody here. Great. Today we're here to talk about the health benefits of protein. Just a disclaimer before I go on that this information is for health education reasons only and should not replace medical advice. Also, I always get the question, is this recording going to be available? And yes, it is. You can go to my website, humannaturellc.com. Whoops. Click on the news tab and you'll see all the previous recordings of the webinar as well as this one. I would say give me 1 to 2 weeks and then I will have it there. I also do send out recordings via my e-newsletter. So if you want to join that, you can send me an email at this address below, the bottom of the slide. So today's talk is in partnership with the Willie Street Co-op. I offer these monthly free webinars, as well as the $45 nutrition sessions. There's a handful of those available through the co-op every month. And besides the work that I do at the co-op, I do have a private practice through my business, Human Nature LLC, which is located on Madison's West Side. If you're interested in those private 45-minute sessions for just $45, you can contact me. I have a few of them available every month via Zoom and in store at Willie West. So that's a great way to get more personal attention and, pick my brain about different questions you might have. Next month, I'm going to be talking about healthy fats. So I hope you'll tune in. Instead of being at noon, it'll be at 1 p.m. on Wednesday, June 7th. So I hope to see you guys there. Okay, today we're going to talk about the nutritional value of protein, ways to improve digestion, which are often a barrier for people in eating adequate protein, things to look for when you're selecting proteins, and then just some different qualities of different proteins that are interesting. So protein is really critical. If we, obviously anthropologists and archaeologists are still arguing about this, but I think there is a growing consensus that our ancestors and our bodies, the physiological bodies that we have now are not that different from our ancestors, and we're adapted to what our ancestors ate. And it seems pretty clear that most of them ate a very heavy protein-rich diet. And indeed, more and more, we're seeing that a protein-rich diet can be therapeutic for different people for a number of reasons. Aside from a protein-rich diet, just for the average person who may not have any health issues, I often find in my consultations with people, I've been working with people for over 15 years now, that they're not eating or digesting the right type of protein. And so I wanted to give a talk about that. And I wanted to also give this talk because I think there can be a little bit of propaganda against eating protein. And I, in my 15 years of experience, find that mindset is typically destructive. I mean, sure, there are some individuals like somebody with medically impaired kidney function who should maybe not be eating, they should have a carefully controlled amount of protein in their diet. But protein offers so many benefits for the body. It's the basis for hormones. It's the basis for having a balanced response to stress. So as we get older, it gets easier and easier to make stress hormones, more of them in response to stress. It's called our cortisol level. And so protein is really helpful for balancing that and kind of counteracting that tendency to respond to stress, maybe more impulsively. Protein is also the foundational piece of neurotransmitter, which is the hormones that are made in the nervous system. So it's very important for mental and emotional wellness. Protein is critical for the immune system. It helps build bones. Bones are made of protein, and obviously muscles are made of protein. Most people are aware of that. And protein is really key to having a healthy metabolism. which is a challenge that a lot of us face as we're aging. And so I can't emphasize enough how important that protein base is if you want to have a healthy and adaptable metabolism. Protein is very important for multiple body systems, the heart, the rest of the cardiovascular system, having healthy hair, continuing to grow healthy hair as you age relies on adequate protein intake. Protein can be a fuel, and it does a number of other things in the body too, in terms of allowing different chemical processes to happen. So can't be healthy without adequate protein. So there's many different ways to get protein in the diet. Most people are aware that there are 9 essential amino acids that you want to try to meet the requirements of on a regular basis, and that you can either eat animal proteins to get all of those, or if you're vegetarian, you may have to do more combining of different sources of vegetarian proteins to get the complete amino acids that you need for health. One of the trade-offs of being vegetarian is that many of the vegetarian proteins are also carbohydrate-rich foods. And so as I go through the talk today, I'll repeat this idea, but basically we become less carbohydrate tolerant as we're aging. And so carbohydrates tend to promote insulin production and insulin resistance, which kind of perpetuates inflammation and works against our efforts to improve health. So it definitely can be done. Obviously, there's some subset of the population that can be healthy on vegetarian proteins, but I would say for the average person, it's been my learning that it's a lot easier and sometimes more direct to get to some of these therapeutic goals if they are not vegetarian. Certainly it can be done, but it requires a lot more supplementation and probably a higher carbohydrate intake than somebody who's not a vegetarian. And just to give you a little background, I mean, I said I've been practicing for 15 years. So when I started practicing, the recommendation, and I would say it's still kind of this way in a lot of natural health circles, was eat meat from time to time, but don't eat too much meat. And I was a vegetarian for a long time. I was actually even a vegan in my early adulthood. And what I have learned over the years is that for most people, they need, as they're aging, they need to really focus more on nutrient-dense protein sources. And the easiest ones tend to be animal-based ones. And so I do tend to encourage people to go that way, although obviously, like I said, with a lot of supplementation and extra work, it is possible to get your protein needs met otherwise. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. So how much protein? Well, so the recommended daily allowance, that's what the RDA is here, is about 46 to 56 grams daily. And this is for a sedentary person. So a person that basically sits in front of a desk all day and doesn't exercise and isn't really working towards any health goal, I would say. I mean, this is my editorializing of that. There's a lot of problems with the recommended daily allowances. They are based on young men in, like, I believe it was the 1940s or 1950s. And so particularly as far as protein goes, they don't reflect the needs of an aging adult. They don't reflect the needs of an aging woman who will go through pregnancy and nursing and different hormonal shifts. And in general, the research that's happening now is suggesting that as we age, our protein requirement increases. And a part of that has to do with lack of good digestion, lack of absorption of protein over time because our stomach acid levels drop as we're aging. But at any rate, the research is showing older adults need higher than this recommended daily allowance. If they're sedentary, they need 68 to 83 grams for the average person. So this is kind of like your mainstream advice. I would say my take on it, and others who work like me typically also suggest more protein. If you are an active adult and you want to maintain muscle, I would say you need a minimum of 65 to 80 grams a day. If you actually want to build muscle, then you need to eat a lot more protein. And I'm always encouraging people to build muscle, because if you can build muscle, you can work against insulin resistance, you're improving your metabolism, you're increasing the density of your mitochondria. And those of you that are familiar with functional medicine know that mitochondrial activity, those are the little organelles inside the cells, they help protect your body from disease, and they help provide you with energy and stress tolerance and a healthy circadian rhythm. There's just all of these things. And so usually I'm encouraging someone to eat even more protein than this minimum. And that recommendation for someone who's actually trying to build muscle to get all of those benefits I just talked about, they're doing strength training in combination with eating properly, would be your body weight in grams of protein. So you can take your ideal body weight. So, maybe for a petite woman, it would be 120 pounds, and she would be wanting to eat 120 grams of protein a day. For the average adult, 150 pounds, wanting to eat 150 grams of protein daily. For a larger individual, obviously it would be scaled up. And so just to give you a reference point for how much protein that is, if you're not accustomed to thinking about numbers and thinking about protein, you can see in the top 4 rows of this table, some typical high protein animal sources like beef or bison or lamb would be comparable, where you're going to get 24, 25 grams for a serving. Greek yogurt is another great way to get healthy protein if someone tolerates dairy. Fish, chicken, they're all going to be pretty similar. So if you're going for 150 grams a day, then you're going to see that you're going to need to have a 3 to 6 ounce serving of animal proteins or something comparable multiple times a day to reach your target. I also have lentils here, almonds, quinoa, eggs. So you can see there are some foods with other protein, but really, as we get towards the bottom, peas, avocados, it's not that much. You'd have to eat a lot of those to hit an optimal protein target. And just in case anybody has questions, go ahead and feel free to write them in the chat. I'll address them at the end. Looks like somebody just wrote in they weren't seeing the slides, but now they are. I hope everybody can see the slides that I'm referring to. So besides all those foundational body things I went over that protein is so important for, I find in practice working with people on their health and their nutrition that protein is just invaluable with helping someone balance out their blood sugar, whether or not they're someone who gets hangry or someone who has blood sugar swings where they have a lot of sugar cravings or they're just very sleepy and lethargic, which is a sign of a blood sugar swing. Protein takes care of that. So I see a lot of people who want to get over their sugar cravings and their sugar addiction. And one of the first things I say is, let's look at what you're eating for protein, and let's make sure that every single meal has an adequate protein. The other way that this is therapeutic for someone is that because they're eating more protein, they're more satiated, their blood sugar is balanced, they're eating less carbohydrates overall. And this helps to reduce inflammation stemming from blood sugar and insulin production and excessive triglycerides. I'll talk about that more in a couple minutes. So overall, you see this reduction in inflammation in the body overall when you increase someone's protein, if it's a good quality protein. There are some protein sources that can be inflammatory for some people, like a processed soy protein comes to mind as one that only the person with the strongest digestion is going to be able to handle the denatured soy proteins in a processed soy burger or something, for example. But there's a lot of other protein sources. Most people really handle fish and seafood well. So that would probably be at the top of a suggestion for an easy to digest protein source. Let's see, we already talked about how protein's basis for hormones, but just to reiterate, if you're concerned about thyroid health, adrenal health, sexual health, these are all things that I spend a lot of time talking with people about one-on-one. Protein is very important. Immune system, if you've got somebody who has a depressed immune system, or maybe they have an autoimmune condition, again, protein is really going to be foundational to fueling the body and helping to change the situation. But if you can't digest protein, then it's not really that valuable, right? And so some people will say, yeah, well, when I eat a hamburger, it just sits in my stomach like a brick. And that is a clear sign that the person does not have the digestive secretions that they need to break down protein. So the feature of a healthy digestive system is that you can make adequate stomach acid, which is made in the stomach, and that's what activates pepsin and other enzymes that break down the protein and the minerals like iron, selenium, zinc. Somebody's low in those minerals, it's usually a sign they've got digestive problems. It's also very important to have a healthy small intestine and colon. So you need to have healthy bacteria there and a healthy lining. And making the digestive secretions to break down the food requires that you have the raw materials in your body. So for example, making stomach acid requires that someone is absorbing enough protein over time. So if people stop eating adequate protein, they're eating fairly low protein, eating more of a plant-based diet, then sometimes that can translate to an inability to really digest protein well or to make digestive secretions. So over time, you begin to see nutritional deficiencies in different B vitamins and in different minerals for a person in that scenario. So there are a number of things you can do to help promote healthy stomach acid. I think sometimes it's a default for people to just kind of stop eating the things that bother them. So if eating protein bothers them, they just eat less of it. And that's, to me, just to sort of make a joke about it, I would say it's kind of like deciding you're uncomfortable when you take a shower, you take a bath, so you're just not going to do it anymore. It's not a really healthy decision long term. You've got to figure out what is the root issue happening here and what can you do to maximize absorption so you don't set yourself up for more problems down the road. So sea salt, a good raw sea salt like Baja Gold. I have a whole nother webinar on salt. You can view it on my website. But sea salt helps provide some of the raw materials for making stomach acid and also helps with stimulating stomach acid. Lemon juice, apple cider vinegar are some other examples of things that help with breaking down proteins and stimulating the digestive juices for proteins. So you can use those with the meal, like serving them with the food, like a slice of lemon with fish. You can also make a lot of progress in terms of pre-digesting the food if you marinate it. So let's say pork roast isn't something that normally agrees with you because it's a dense protein. You could try marinating the roast beforehand in, apple cider vinegar or something comparable to help pre-digest it. Betaine hydrochloride is something that's similar to the other things here I mentioned in terms of stimulating stomach acid secretions, but it's stronger. It's a supplement from beets and would be taken in a capsule form. And there's a whole protocol where you slowly increase the dosage and then even more slowly back off in order to sort of wake up your stomach again. There was something I wanted to say about this. Oh, well, it'll come back to me in a minute. One thing to keep in mind is that a lot of Americans eat high carbohydrate diet, like they're having bread or pasta with most meals, crackers, grains, even whole grains, even things like quinoa and potatoes will suppress stomach acid. And so sometimes reducing those carbohydrates with the meals can help with breaking down the minerals and the proteins that we're shooting for. I know what I wanted to say. I wanted to add that stomach acid production is a north-south process, north being like the upper part of your digestive system, being the stomach and the esophagus, and south being, the bowel and the lower gut. And so you've got to have healthy stomach acid production in order for everything to work downstream. So sometimes a lower gut issue is actually pointing back to a stomach acid issue. So one of the most valuable components of protein is the fat that comes with it. So it's not just, when you think about a whole food like a piece of fish, it's not just the protein, there's fats and there's vitamins there too. So when you're eating a whole food, you're getting a broader nutritional value. In the case of fats, and I'll talk more about this next month, there's going to be benefits for the nervous system because fat is an optimal fuel for the brain. Fat is very critical for repairing and healing and overcoming from trauma. And I would say protein too. When I think of somebody having an accident or experiencing some kind of trauma, protein and fat would be the primary foods that would be helpful to eat. So we'll talk more about fats next month, but very important piece of whole protein type foods. There's a number of fat-soluble vitamins in different protein sources, especially the animal protein ones. So vitamin A, D, E, K, these are all critical for supporting immune health, brain health, thyroid health, just general endocrine system health, gut health. So you get the idea. There's also a number of vitamins, and these are vitamins that are especially high in animal sources of proteins, and as well as the minerals like iron, zinc, magnesium. But if someone can't digest fat very well, sometimes that is a barrier when we're talking about protein-rich foods too. And people usually know that. They usually know, oh, when I eat a high-fat food, it gives me problems. I can tell, my digestive system is bothering me. For some people, if it's just a minor issue, just eating more fat helps with the bile flow that's produced in the gallbladder and the liver. And that helps with the fat digestion overall. Other people might need herbs like dandelion root, yellow dock, triphala, beets, prunes are foods, and sea salt. There are different digestive supplement products like Beta Plus or dandelion root is an herbal option that really help with the flow of bile, that help with breaking down fat. And digestive enzymes made in the pancreas are also really important for fully breaking down protein. This is a picture of an example supplement that combines the betaine HCl with something for bile flow like ox bile and the digestive supplements, enzymes. So I just want to spend a minute talking about iron, because the best way to provide iron to the body, in my opinion, is with proteins, specifically animal proteins. And in my work with people one-on-one, this is one of the major issues that often arises, especially for women. You think about it, most women have been menstruating for multiple decades, losing blood. And so if you're not taking in the food, not able to absorb the iron, or just not eating enough iron-rich foods, then an iron deficiency becomes a problem. The most common presentation of that is fatigue, but it can also affect people mentally and emotionally, because iron is a foundational part of making the neurotransmitters dopamine and serotonin. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that helps us with pain relief and helps give us a sense of reward. And serotonin is the neurotransmitter that helps us be happy and relax. So iron is always very important to be looking at. In my work with people, I look at people's labs, and I'm very critical about the numbers. And iron is one of the important pieces, specifically the ferritin test. But what I want to talk about here is when we're talking about animal versus versus vegetarian sources of protein, that there's two types of iron. There's a non-heme and a heme. So heme is the type found in most meats, and as well as a little non-heme. And then non-heme is what's found in plant foods, as well as eggs. And the non-heme is a lot harder to absorb. So just to put it in perspective, to get enough iron, you would have to eat a trough of green vegetables to get the same amount of iron that you could get in a serving of meat. So when you're selecting different proteins, I do think it really matters how the animal was raised for a number of reasons. Nutritionally, whether or not an animal was allowed to graze or be pastured outside will affect its nutrition. And they've actually shown this in a number of studies that animals that are grazed, grass-fed, for example, grass-fed cows have higher levels of amino acids, which should translate to more protein than those that are not. Higher levels of vitamin D, obviously they're outside, so they're going to be making more vitamin D, and that can transfer to people that are eating it. As well as higher levels of omega-3, which is great compared to omega-6, because most people get too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3. So if you can get grass-fed animal products or pastured animal products, they're always generally going to be higher omega-3. And this translates to fish and seafood too. So this is a picture of a fish farming operation, and you can see they're just feeding the fish corn. Okay, that's not a fish food. It's not a natural fish food. Fish in their natural environment might eat other fish, or they might eat, more like aquatic plants. And that type of diet is going to confer all the omega-3 benefits for the fish. So if you're eating fish that are farmed and fed corn, it's more important what they're being fed, then they're going to be high omega-6 because they were raised on corn and soy. So that will translate to you for the different health outcomes that you have based on how the animals have been raised. So in case you're not familiar with this discussion of omega-3s versus omega-6, and there's omega-9s too, I have the omega-3 sources listed at the top of the slide. So you can see it's primarily fish. You can also see that you can get omega-3s from flax seeds. However, only about, I think the statistic is about 60% of the population cannot handle flaxseed. So maybe 40% or less can actually break flaxseed down to the beneficial prostaglandins. The rest of the population and the studies they've done can't do that. They can only really benefit from an omega-3 source that's from fish. So that's important to keep in mind. The omega-6 oils are these polyunsaturated fatty acids based basically in grains or seeds. So you see safflower, sunflower, corn, etc. And the same with omega-9, it'd be from nuts and seeds. And so like I said, overall, people tend to get too much omega-6 and not enough omega-3. And this leads to a lot of inflammatory health conditions. One real extreme example of this is when someone is reliant on ibuprofen all the time for pain relief. I don't mean just like once in a while because you tweaked your back, you take ibuprofen. I mean like you've got to take it all the time. And that's usually a sign you have too much omega-6 in the diet and need to make some of the corrections that I'm talking about. I mean, some of the corrections I'm talking about will benefit just about everybody. But definitely seeing a real shift in health status for someone who might be reliant on something like ibuprofen or Tylenol, which works by dampening that omega-6 pathway. Here's another example of too many omega-6s, maybe too many just in the diet overall, as someone who gets histamine reactions or has a lot of rashes or hives. This can often be addressed by reducing omega-6 and increasing in omega-3. And one of the culprits in the diet, I mean, there's many. I don't mean to pick on poultry, but I often do find sometimes people need to reduce the dependency on poultry when they have these extreme examples of omega-6 dominance, like the hives or They're needing ibuprofen all the time. And that is because most poultry is raised with high omega-6 foods. So the level is very high in those proteins. So sources of omega-6s besides the poultry, and it's because they're grain and soy fed. If they're grass-fed, then they're not so much. And the same with the eggs. Eggs from pastured chickens are going to be much higher in omega-3 typically. But plant-based foods tend to be very high in omega-6. So plant-based diet, sometimes people will run into this issue. People eating a lot of conventional meat and dairy could have the same problem because of what the animals are eating. The same with farmed fish. So when you're purchasing proteins, especially animal proteins, you want to be looking for things on the label that say pastured, free range, organic, soy-free. Then you're going to be getting a better quality product, and it's going to be higher omega-3 most likely. So there's another side to the protein selection piece that I just wanted to speak to very briefly. I think sometimes people are discouraged from eating protein, specifically animal protein, because of environmental arguments. And I definitely think that people's heart is in the right place. Very important to be good stewards of our planet, to be making changes that help with climate change, to be thinking about animal welfare and making sure animals are raised in humane and healthy conditions. But there is also a cost to plant-based monoculture production of food too, right? 98% of our old growth forest is gone due to deforestation for farming. 90% of our grasslands are gone due to farming. And actually raising cattle, for example, in a sustainable way, using different models where the animals are grass-fed, can actually help with carbon sequestration and grassland development and restoration. So I don't think that we necessarily need to, since this is a talk sponsored by the Willie Street Co-op, I didn't want to get too much on a soapbox anyway, but I just wanted to say, that there are methods of regenerative agriculture that include animal husbandry and raising animals that actually do help promote restoring biodiversity and help work against climate change and controlling for climate change and global warming. So I don't think we need to necessarily be at one extreme dietary choice or the other in order to meet our environmental goals. I think we can think about what is the health benefit of eating these things for people, and let's promote ways of raising animals that help us meet these goals, that we can all agree are good. Another piece about eating animal protein that people ask me about is heart disease. There is this idea that eating more meat relates to a likelihood for developing heart disease. And this was an idea that was promoted a number of decades ago. When I was born in the 70s and raised in the 80s, and this idea was definitely hammered into all of us around that time, including myself. But the newer research is actually debunking this idea that the cholesterol content of a food actually relates to somebody having a problem with heart disease. And I could go on and on about this. I have a whole nother talk about this, but for today's talk, I just wanted to point you to this one study that looked at the numbers in the lipid panel. So when you go to the doctor, or if you order it yourself, you can order something called a lipid panel, which is your cholesterol test. And it's going to tell you total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides. And so this study looked at, when you're looking at tests like this, which numbers are actually the most important predictor for heart disease. And the outcome wasn't actually what we thought. It's not total cholesterol. It's not LDL. It is this number, the triglyceride number over the HDL number. So after this talk, maybe I'm going to encourage you, go look at your tests, see how you do. Triglycerides, you take that number and then you divide by HDL, and you want that number to be less than 1.5. What this ratio is actually telling us about is carbohydrates or response to carbohydrates in the diet over good fat. So the more your carbohydrate intake for you, the higher this ratio is going to get, which is bad. The lower the carbohydrate intake, the better this number is going to be, the lower it's going to be, which is good and translates to good health as far as we know from this model that the researchers made. HDL comes from good fat. So bacon, eggs, fish, soft-shelled seafood, and purple vegetables. And cardiovascular exercise seems to help some people with raising their HDL. So the more good fat you can have, the lower the ratio is going to go. So the take-home message really is not at all what we thought, where they were saying high animal protein means a predictor for heart disease. It's not at all like that. And in fact, a number of studies have confirmed that you can eat adequate levels of animal protein so long as your diet is very balanced. There's no issue that puts you at higher risk for having a diet like that. And to take that a step further, I would say, because there are quite a lot of studies that say the opposite of what I just said, but when you go into those data sets and you control for people smoking and drinking, you actually find that there isn't any difference between people that are eating meat and people that aren't eating meat, or how often people eat meat or how often they don't. So it's really changing, and what is coming to the forefront is we need to reduce carbohydrates and we need to increase good fat if we want to have less risk. And this is why eating foods high in carbohydrates basically causes raised blood sugar. So like, let's just say eating a banana or eating a piece of cake or eating a bowl of rice. Obviously, someone's reaction to this is going to vary for the person. How fast is their metabolism? How well do they handle blood sugar rises? But in general, I'm just telling you those so you know that those are all examples of carbohydrates. And if you did any one of those foods in excess, it would begin to translate to too many triglycerides, because when the blood sugar goes up, the body makes triglycerides. It makes triglycerides in the liver in order to store the extra sugar as fat for later. And this process is really tiring. So if you've ever had a pancake breakfast and then needed to go lie down on the couch, and I know I have, that's what's happening. You're making triglycerides, and it takes a lot of energy in the body to do that. So if on a repeated basis, you're eating more carbohydrates than you're burning, more carbohydrates for you, then this is going to happen to you. You're going to see your triglyceride number go up and potentially have issues with your ratio, because this actually results in raising overall cholesterol and dampening HDL. And a topic for another talk would be this affects hormones too. Testosterone for men goes down, and for women, estrogen and progesterone shift. But anyway, the point of all of this is to say that it's okay to eat animal protein, and it's going to translate to therapeutic benefits. And we have a lot of new research in the last decade saying that actually most of the problems with cardiovascular disease stem from insulin resistance, which stems from aging and lifestyle, too much blue light, too much sedentary nature, and too many carbohydrates in the diet. Here's a visual, in case you're a visual person. Taking in dietary carbohydrate translates to the production of increased triglycerides, which put us at the greatest risk for heart disease compared to the other factors. One other thing to be thinking about when you're looking at animal-based versus vegetarian-based proteins, again, some people are going to be more sensitive to this than others. But there's something called phytic acid that's naturally found in all plant foods and it's concentrated in the grains and the legumes or beans like lentils and garbanzo beans and things like that, nuts and seeds. And this phytic acid actually inhibits your absorption of the calcium and magnesium, also things like zinc and selenium. So if you have problems with mineralizing your bones and getting enough minerals in, and also teeth problems, sometimes that can go back to an overabundance of the phytic acid in the diet. Another thing that could come along with eating a lot of a plant-based diet that's often not talked about is, besides these phytates, there's also something called lectins. Lectins are the chemical that the plant makes in nature to protect itself from other things, other plants, competing other plants or animals. And grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds tend to have the highest level of lectins also. So sometimes when someone is very sensitive, maybe they're having a lot of sensitive gut issues, or they have autoimmune issues, then we need to look at reducing the intake of these very high phytate, high lectin foods in order for the person to get a therapeutic benefit. So now I want to talk for the rest of the program today about just the quality of different types of foods. So this slide, I have some vegetarian options for people. So obviously eggs can be a great source of protein. They are a common allergen, but assuming that you don't have a problem with eggs, they can work really well for someone. Like I mentioned earlier, it's good to try to find eggs from chickens that are pastured and soy-free, although it can be challenging. And another way to boost protein is to eat egg whites, which you can either separate yourself or purchase from the store, and you can mix the egg whites in with other food or in with the regular eggs you're having. Just if you're trying to meet a specific protein goal, that's one way that many people find helpful. Also high quality dairy, like I showed in the table a while back, like a Greek yogurt is a great way to get an appreciable amount of protein in. Some people are sensitive to dairy, so again, might want to work with someone like myself for identifying food sensitivities or trying to reduce inflammation that way. But dairy can work for a lot of people, and we do have access to a lot of good dairy, obviously, in Wisconsin. Lentils and beans like lentils are another great way to get protein. And I mentioned the phytic acid and the lectins. So there's always going to be a little bit of that with those foods, but if you can properly prepare those foods, then you can make them a lot easier to digest and kind of circumvent those problems with phytic acid and lectins. So in order to do that, you have to soak and rinse the foods very well and cook them very well. So like, for example, when I'm making lentils, I'm going to soak them for 12 hours. I'm going to rinse them. I'm going to soak them for another 12 hours and rinse them. And then I'm going to cook them until they're really soft. You know, so that's an example of a way to prepare the food to help break down all of those things I was talking about that can be barriers for digestion of those foods. There are some good vegetarian protein powders. I like cranberry powder. Egg powder can be a good option. Some people really like pea protein powders. If someone has gut issues, then they might have to do a little bit of experimentation to find a protein powder, but it can be a very convenient way to get closer to a protein target. Nuts and seeds, again, can have some protein in them. They, like the lentils and other legumes, would need to be properly prepared with soaking them and rinsing them. And I also wanted to add chlorella or spirulina. Chlorella is a freshwater microalgae. You know, in the serving size, most people take it. It doesn't have a lot of protein, but it is highly nutritious. And if you're able to take higher doses of chlorella or spirulina, spirulina is a seawater version, they're excellent sources of protein and B vitamins for people. Cured meats is an animal protein that I wanted to talk about because I think in the natural health area, it can be taboo because of some research, older research that stated that it was carcinogenic to be eating food cured with artificial nitrates. It turns out that recently the data was reviewed, peer reviewed, and the whole correlation there was debunked. So we don't currently have any research showing a correlation between these high nitrate or cured meats and any kind of a health problem. So that's there, you know, in case you were holding back. Here's some new information that might have you change your perspective. I personally don't like to eat a lot of commercially cured meat just as it tastes like it has more chemicals, and I want to avoid that chemical burden, but and it also can have things like smoke flavor in it. So I mentioned a little bit about fish and shellfish being one of the best proteins. Really is very easy for most people to digest and a very rehabilitating food because of the high levels of omega-3s, specifically the DHA, which is a type of fatty acid that's very important for brain and eye health, and it's just a great anti-inflammatory. But you want to be looking for wild, or like in the case of some of the farm salmon, if you can get the salmon that's raised in the deeper fjords and fed, you know, real fish food like plants instead of corn, then that can be acceptable too. Beef and bison are very rich in minerals like iron, zinc, selenium, and protein. And you want to be looking for grass-fed organic in order to get the real, you know, the greatest benefit. Same with lamb, very, very nutrient dense food, appears to be very high in glutathione, which is an antioxidant that helps the body to detoxify various chemicals and metals and recover from stress. I talked a little bit about chicken and turkey already. It can be hard to find sources of these that are free range and organic and not fed a lot of soy. But if you can find it, then it's great. Otherwise, just recognize that it's got, you know, that higher omega-6 content. It may not be as beneficial in a rotation of food as the other sources of protein I'm talking about. Pork can be a great food too. It's very dense in protein, very high in protein, very high in fat, which can be very nourishing for people. It's also very high in some of the different micronutrients like selenium that help support healthy thyroid and a healthy immune system. Tends to be higher in vitamin D and E than some of the other foods too. And I get asked about protein powder often. This is probably my favorite protein powder, the Great Lakes collagen powder. It's a beef collagen, but you can also find some fish and seafood and even some vegetarian collagen products on the market. And so this can be a nice protein powder for some people because it doesn't have a flavor and it mixes in well with different foods. So that's another resource if you're trying to increase your protein intake overall and kind of looking for easy ideas. So to summarize, there's a lot of value to eating protein, but you've got to be able to digest it. So sometimes you have to take some steps to improve digestion in order to be able to eat the protein that's so important. It's really important to be looking at labels and thinking about if you're choosing animal proteins, how those animals are raised. Obviously, if you're choosing vegetarian protein sources, then eating organic and pesticide-free is going to be really helpful. Making sure that you pre-soak vegetarian proteins to help work around some of the trade-offs of those are going to be important too. And overall, it's important with your diet to be thinking about a good balance of omega-3 to omega-6. And if you want more information about that, I would refer you to my webinar on fats, which is on the website.